Thanks very much, Mike, and it's terrific to be back at Williamsburg. Wonderful to be at William and Mary. Some good friends of mine have helped put this program together, and it's super to be with you all. Brad and I had breakfast this morning because we have a lot of stuff to talk about, so I'm having a really productive day. Let me just tell you a little bit about my organization, the One Campaign, what we do, and how social entrepreneurship fits into our vision of the world. So we're an organization that was co-founded, as Mike said, by Bono, the singer of U2 and activist for 30 years or so on international development issues. We are a campaigning and advocacy organization that fights in capitals around the world to make sure that resources flow for smart and effective programs of intervention that fight extreme poverty and preventable disease. So we have offices in Washington, where we're headquartered, in London, Paris, Brussels, Berlin, in other words, anywhere where there's money that might flow from the rich world to the poor, and a growing presence in Africa itself, headquartered in Johannesburg. In another part of our operation, also reporting into me, we have a division which is, in a way, a social entrepreneurship vision in and of itself, called Product Red, where Neville and I were kind of having 10 seconds on this a second ago, where we sign up deals with companies around the world, mainly in the US, but not exclusively by any means, and some of them global companies, whereby if you buy a product of those companies that is branded red, so a red Nano, a red Starbucks, or what have you, a chunk of money goes directly to the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and malaria. In the 6 years that we've been up and running this model, we've now sent more than $200 million to the Global Fund. Social entrepreneurship factors into our work in a number of different ways, and let me see if I can kind of sort of survey the field. Most of our campaigning work is directed towards Africa, and when we started putting together an advocacy organization, I think it's fair to say, I've only been running it for 18 months, I should say, I think it's fair to say that when the model was put together, there was an assumption that's rapidly been overtaken by events, that the key thing that we should do was to campaign, lobby, fight for flows of official development assistance, of foreign aid, to go from the rich world to the poor. It's extremely important that battle continues. The United Kingdom, God bless it, just announced 2 days ago that they had hit, after 43 years, a target of 0.7% of the global national income going in overseas development aid, the first country in the G8 to have done so. God bless them. But increasingly, there is an understanding that the process of development in the poor parts of the world is increasingly not dependent on ODA. It's increasingly not development on official aid flows. It's dependent on a whole range of other factors, which I think we're understanding more and more as we go along, on flows of private capital, either because of investment by private corporations, or increasingly we're understanding the importance of remittances from family members back to the poor parts of the world, people who live here or in Europe, sending checks and money orders back to the poor parts of the world. Increasingly, and to an extent that's going to be much, much more significant in the next 20 years than the last 20 years, the domestic resources of developing countries themselves, which increasingly dwarf any imaginable degree of aid flows from the rich world to the north, by a factor of 4, 5, 6, 7 as one rolls ahead. And that's really where the money is going to come for health and schools and roads and what have you. But also, I think we're beginning to understand the agency, sorry to kind of slip into the jargon here, the agency effects of people in the poor world themselves doing things for themselves and kind of setting up businesses themselves, making their own interventions on a big scale and a small scale, to increase life chances, to make life better, to make life a little safer, prosperous, and nicer for themselves, their families, and for their neighbors, whether that's in the health sector or schools or whatever. We award a prize each year called the One Award. Quite a big prize, actually, because one of our board members very, very generously endowed it to an NGO in Africa that we decide is doing the most to advance the Millennium Development Goals, or one of the Millennium Development Goals in Africa. And in the 4 or 5 years now that we've been running the prize, the number of submissions that we've got for the prize has kind of gone up every year. In the last 2 years, it's been very, very clear to me, kind of looking at the submissions, that more and more of the submissions are from entrepreneurs. They are from people who are establishing small businesses to tackle a precise social ill, or to tackle something that can be improved in the world. There is, the quite by now well-known company in Zambia, where a woman was appalled at the lack of nutritious food available for Mrs. Banda. There are many, many Mrs. Bandas in Africa, anyway, including the president. Where a woman saw that there was a lack of nutritious food in her village. She set up a cooperative. She said to farmers, you farm whatever it is, biofortified sweet potatoes or whatever, and I'll sell it. I'll process it and I'll sell it. So guaranteed market, shops now all over Zambia. There was the group in northern Kenya who was shortlisted for our prize just last year, where a group got together and used local products to create sanitary pads for young women so that they didn't have to kind of stay away from school for 1 week out of 4, but can continue their education. All done for a profit, all done on a kind of market basis. But increasingly effective. We're seeing more and more and more examples of stuff like that, of Africa, which I often think is sort of a continent of entrepreneurs. Of kind of incredible creativity and drive, dreaming up examples like that to kind of really advance social goods. So let me just make one point, Mike. At the end. And I should say, I'm happy to kind of answer questions about what we do on the red side, which is our own, as it were, social entrepreneurship, if people want to get into that. So I think this is a terrific development, and I think it's something that we and others who are in the development field should be encouraging and should be spending more about, with one caveat. Some of the issues that we want to campaign on to make life better for people, to make life chances, to enhance life chances, to enhance prosperity, to increase livelihood, to make sure that more children live after 5, whatever it is, require scale. Require real scale. We have not got to a position where 10 years ago we were distributing something like 30 to 50,000 doses of life-saving antiretroviral drugs in Africa, to a position now where we're distributing nearly 8 million, incredible change in 10 years. That's 8 million lives saved, literally. We haven't got there by small-scale little initiatives. We've got there because we committed to do really life-changing and actually quite expensive programs like PEPFAR here, the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, or the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and Malaria. So sometimes scale really, really matters. My obsession at the moment, as everyone who's heard me speak in the last year knows, because I kind of throw it out all the time, is that tonight, 1.4 billion people around the world at 6:30 will have nothing to do because their lights will have gone out. So just kind of think of the concept that I kind of call life after dark. Just think what we could do just think of all the things that you do after 6:30 every night. Just think of all the things that you do after 6:30 every night, from homework to reading to watching TV, from surfing the internet to making sure that your food for tomorrow morning is fresh, and so on and so forth. And just remember that 1.4 billion people can't do any of that. Actually, their life after dark is worse than being dark because they're cooking with kerosene, lamps which give them terrible pulmonary diseases and so on and so forth. We will not bring power to Africa. We will not switch on Africa. We will not, 880 million of that 1.4 million in sub-Saharan Africa. We'll not power up Africa. We'll not give people life after dark with small-scale initiatives. Sadly, I wish we would. And there's lots of brilliant people out there that are doing kind of cute little solar lights and this, that, and the other. But if we're going to if we're really going to embark on what I believe should be a real charge to this generation, to bring to 1.4 billion people on the planet the sort of benefits that we have because of the wonders of electricity, then with all its life-changing, life-enhancing capacity, I don't think we'll quite get there by social entrepreneurship. So sometimes big and sometimes scale is necessary.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we've all going to have questions, but I'd like to try to go through each presentation first, and then we'll open it up for questions. So, Brad, please.
It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. I'd like to show you some pictures and tell a story. So stand here so I can actually see the overhead slide. So this morning, I'm going to make a claim that I hope will provoke some discussion. And I'm going to advance the argument that open source development should be a defining feature of social entrepreneurship. So several months ago, USAID's administrator, Raj Shah, laid out a vision for open source development. Global development has been dominated for nearly 6 decades by a "we are experts, trust us" model. Dr. Shah proposed that we move away from this fortress of experts model towards a model that enables students, university faculty, corporations, faith leaders, philanthropists, and nonprofits to access, analyze, and innovate with open data in order to find creative solutions to vexing development problems. I was really struck by the vision that Dr. Shah outlined because it really resonates with AidData's experience, the organization that I'm here representing today. So I'd just like to tell you a little bit about AidData's story. So AidData was founded with a very clear mission to build a one-stop shop for detailed information about aid projects from more than 90 aid agencies and development banks, totaling more than $5.5 trillion over the last 60 years. But until very recently, we could not answer a very fundamental question. Where were all of these projects located on the ground? In the summer of 2010, students, faculty, and staff at William & Mary, at Brigham Young University, and at Development Gateway, a nonprofit in Washington, began sort of experimenting with this new methodology for georeferencing the precise locations of development activities overseas. And we managed to convince a small group of world bankers who refer to themselves as open data evangelists that we should start a small pilot program to assess the viability of geocoding overseas aid activities. But many other world bankers, apart from these self-proclaimed open data evangelists, were quite skeptical of this initiative. They said, georeferencing aid activities would be too complicated, it would be too costly, it would be too time-consuming. We were undeterred by the skepticism. We plowed ahead and we pulled together a team of 12 student geocoders. These students camped out in a conference room in Washington, D.C. for 6 weeks. And during that period, they achieved something that I think is truly remarkable. They combed through mountains and mountains of project documents and sort of experimented iteratively with this methodology. And at the end of this period, they managed to pinpoint the precise latitude and longitude coordinates of the World Bank's entire active project portfolio. That's 2,500 projects, 30,000 locations in 144 countries. This is 12 student interns in a period of 6 weeks. This is a picture of the students in the conference room, geocoders hard at work. This small pilot changed the way the global development community thinks about aid distribution and impact. One of the very first maps that we produced showed very clearly, and this is the map on your left-hand side, that while poverty is concentrated in Kenya's north, on the border with Somalia, World Bank projects are clustered in the south. And so this map prompted serious debate and introspection within the bank about how their investments were being targeted. But this map only included data from 2 of the 60+ bilateral and multilateral aid agencies and development banks that are active in Kenya. And as everyone knows, effective donor aid coordination requires that every donor knows what the other donor is doing. So in the summer of 2011, the following summer, Aid Data teamed up with the University of Texas at Austin and the Ministry of Finance in Malawi, and we said, look, let's see if we can actually geocode the entire universe of aid projects in a single country. And we did it. So our data collection work in Malawi, which again was spearheaded by a group of very hard-charging students, revealed major sources of inefficiency in the way that these scarce public resources were being allocated. The map showed, this is one of the very first maps showing 33 official bilateral and multilateral donors, that in many cases donors are tripping over each other, and the right hand often does not know what the left hand is doing. These maps have created pressure for donors to more effectively coordinate with each other and to reduce duplication and other sources of inefficiency. Geocoding is also changing the way that the development community evaluates aid impact. So we just talked about aid distribution, now let's talk about aid impact. In 2011, we decided to test whether we could map the spatial distribution of successful and unsuccessful World Bank projects. When we did this in Afghanistan, we found that contrary to the conventional wisdom, World Bank projects in Afghanistan are not more likely to fail in conflict-afflicted areas, more so than in peaceful areas. Instead, as you can see on the map, many failed projects seem to cluster in the relatively, these failed projects seem to cluster in the relatively less violent provinces north of Kabul. Right? So you can see those red flags in and around Kabul. And this finding, again, challenged a key assumption at the World Bank. And frankly, what it did is it helped World Bankers identify a question that they didn't even know that they should have been asking in the first place. And this is sort of an example of the power of open data. Finally, I think one of the other uses of geocoded aid data, which I think could be a real game changer in the coming years, is using the data to empower citizens in developing countries to locate and provide feedback on these projects in their own communities. And in the summer of 2011, Aid Data and UNICEF Uganda teamed up on a project called U-Report to engage citizens to provide crowdsourced feedback on projects in their own communities using their cell phones. So geocoded aid data, what does it do? It effectively provides this sort of informational infrastructure that one needs to tag this citizen feedback to specific donor-funded projects and effectively create a Yelp for development. So through the power of geocoding and crowdsourcing, I think we really have an extraordinary opportunity in the coming years to sort of close this broken feedback loop between donors with good intentions and their intended beneficiaries. Finally, in just November of this past year, Aid Data received some strong external validation that these sort of pilot activities that we were undertaking to liberate geospatial aid and development information had value. USAID, through a newly established network called the Higher Education Solutions Network, decided to invest $25 million in Aid Data's work over the next 5 years. And this partnership is dramatically expanding our global reach and impact. So what was once very provincial work in Williamsburg and Provo, Utah and Washington is now going into Kathmandu and Port-au-Prince. And we're really focusing now on increasing the local uptake and impact of these data with local civil society organizations and universities that can use the data for evidence-based advocacy and policy making. So how do we get here in such a short period of time? Honestly, the key, I think, is that we have, whether we knew it at the time or not, we have sort of embraced this vision that Dr. Shaw the USAID administrator, articulated. One of the pillars of this open source development model involves working across traditional institutional boundaries and taking advantage of network-based forms of governance. AidData itself is a partnership between William & Mary, Brigham Young University, and Development Gateway. And we work very closely with nonprofits, private foundations, small businesses, large corporations like Esri, development finance institutions like the World Bank, the African Development Bank, as well as finance and planning ministries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And I think this commitment to working across institutional boundaries has really proven to be one of the secrets of AidData's success. And finally, I just want to sort of close on a more personal note. So I was an undergraduate at William & Mary in 1999 to 2003. And I decided to do an honors thesis my senior year. And I wanted to study how foreign assistance might be used to address the root causes of human vulnerability to natural disasters. And I quickly learned that foreign aid data were inaccessible or insufficiently detailed to do the analysis that I needed to do to get a good grade on my thesis. And so I approached my faculty members at William & Mary with a really big idea. I proposed that we challenge the guardians of development orthodoxy and develop an open source platform that would make information on foreign aid projects far more accessible and usable to researchers, to policymakers, and advocacy groups. We've come a really long way over the last 10 years from this idea for an online platform that we sketched on the back of a napkin in a local bar in Williamsburg to where we are today. So, you know, it's quite striking to me that AidData did not begin with a group of development experts identifying a problem and a top-down solution to the problem. Rather, it began with a student asking a question that no one could answer. An undergraduate honors thesis at William & Mary catalyzed $250,000 in seed capital from the National Science Foundation, and that NSF grant catalyzed follow-on grants from the Hewlett Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and from there, AidData began to develop a diverse group of customers, funders, partners, including the World Bank, the Defense Department, the African Development Bank, GFDRR, USAID, FAO, it goes on and on. AidData today has 40 professional staff, more than 100 student research assistants and interns, a network of 100 faculty affiliates, partnerships with some of the world's leading development finance institutions, a presence in 15 developing countries, and an annual budget that rivals some medium-sized businesses in the Tidewater, Virginia area. So this morning, I'd like to encourage all of you to consider the promise of open source development. AidData, I think, provides a good example of how open data is moving us away from the fortress of experts model and towards a model that creates space for a diverse group of players and contributors to achieve social impact. So I'll leave you with the words of Bono, the chief communicator-in-chief, the communicator-in-chief for the One campaign. He said, "Open data and transparency will turbocharge ending extreme poverty." So, thanks.
Thank you, Brad. That's a great story. Really, thank you for sharing. Greg?
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll stay seated as well. First of all, I'd just like to thank all of you for having me and obviously for putting this whole event together. It's pretty extraordinary, and this is a real, I think, a learning experience all the way around. I mean, we had a wonderful dinner last night, and I learned a tremendous amount that was new and reinforcing as well. And I have to say as well, it's always a little bit surreal for me to be here because I was, my parents actually met here at William & Mary, and my sister went to William & Mary. And so I can somewhat recall having my little wooden musket and three-point hat running down the street. So certainly it's been a long time since then. It's been quite a journey. But I thought maybe I would just spend a few moments to talk about our work and what our team does. And then maybe spend a little bit more time talking about social entrepreneurship and touching on, I think, so many of the points that have come up already, and some things that I'm thinking about and we're thinking about as an organization. Just to sort of get to the need part of what it is that we do, and I apologize, so many people are probably familiar with this, but If you look at billions of people in the developing world, millions upon millions of communities, and you look at a family's home, a family of 6, a family of 8, a family of 4, they're cooking campfire style on the floor and inhaling smoke every day and using an inordinate amount of wood. And children have to go get that wood or they have to spend money on the wood. And that's how people live. That same family obviously doesn't have electricity, so that it's dark at night. They can't study, they can't read. They don't have vision care. So if you think about even just basic reading glasses that 95% of people in the world are going to need when they're 40 years old and get older, people can't be productive. They can't work. They can't see up close anymore. Or vegetable seeds, or if you look at water purification devices, people are drinking contaminated water. So if you look at all of those scarcity of resources and all those challenges that a family faces in cooking or in lighting or in healthcare, what have you, there are all these commonalities throughout the developing world. And really what people need is simply access oftentimes to technologies. People need access to solar lamps and solar cell phone chargers. Not to say that's the only solution, but it's a part of the solution. People need access to basic cook stove. People need access to vision care. People need access to water purification devices. And so many other things that would be sort of durable goods. And to date, really the only way that people are getting this access in so many parts of the world is through donations. And although donations and contributions from generous foundations and individuals and organizations are critical when we think about disaster relief, we think about after man-made disasters, if we really want to empower people to take charge of their own lives and pull themselves out of poverty, there need to be local solutions, local entrepreneurial solutions. But the assumption with microcredit is that there's already a business and people simply need access to capital. So what we do, and what came out of my time in living in Guatemala originally, I lived in the western highlands of Guatemala for about 5 years after I'd worked in banking for about 5 as well. What we do is basically empower local, identify, train, and equip local, primarily women entrepreneurs to go out to remote villages and market and sell technologies like eyeglasses and water filters and solar lamps and cook stoves, things that have a positive health, economic, and energy impact on a family's life, and as a consequence, an environmental impact on the community. And we've come up looking at different models and best practices. What we devised back in 2003, 2004 is a model that we call the MicroConsignment model. And it's really, in so many regards, about uncertainty and risk shifting. Because if you think about how are you going to empower local entrepreneurs to get things to these communities, one of the great challenges, number one, is nobody's ever sold them before. Right? So people don't have confidence in the market, they can't project demand. The second thing is nobody's ever had this business before. Obviously, one's a consequence of the other. So people have potential entrepreneurs have a high level of uncertainty or lack of self-confidence in their ability to go out and sell things. Right? We know to simply give them the goods, to donate the goods for them to sell isn't going to work. We know that access to capital isn't enough, and simply if we were to provide them access to the goods on credit, if you think about that uncertainty, if nobody had ever sold what you're trying to sell and you had no concept of how to go out and sell it, would you start a business with 100% debt? It doesn't work. So financing is important, but simply microcredit isn't the solution. So what we do is fit that place between donations and credit to open these new markets for new entrepreneurs. And we simply use a consignment solution that we call the MicroConsignment model. And it's about equipping entrepreneurs with everything they need from a training perspective, marketing perspective, working together. And then instead of asking them to make an investment in this basket of products up front, after they've gone through a process, we simply consign them the goods. Then they go out to communities. We work together on how to market in communities. They sell them, they market and they sell them. They come back, then they instantly keep a portion of the profits. They return the rest back to our local organizations we work with, and it gets reinvested in more growth. And through that, a woman is able to test drive and see if it can work. And if it does work in a very short period of time, then she'll learn more. She'll become more invested in the model and grow her capacity to serve more communities in more different ways. And so really it's out of the growth of looking for a solution originally for cook stoves and seeing that it had application for other things. We first started in Guatemala, and since that time, it's really been about scaling deep and scaling broad, finding what are more things that share similar characteristics that we can empower entrepreneurs to take to communities and offer at the right price and in the right place. So building out the basket and expanding broadly by trying in new countries and seeing if our theory and what had worked in one place is actually more broadly applicable. So working in Nicaragua and Ecuador and the Dominican Republic. We just started working in Haiti this past year. And trying for ourselves to learn the best practices, because although we're scaling ourselves as an organization, what we recognize, and I think it's so much of what everybody's been saying, is it would be foolish to think that we could tackle this problem alone, because we can't, and obviously we simply don't have the capacity. It's not the smartest way. So doing it ourselves is one part of the strategy, but the other two, I think, more important kind of legs of the stool moving forward are how do we teach and train other organizations in other parts of the world this methodology so that they can use it as a tool for what they're trying to do in their own communities. So we're working with an organization in Peru, we're working with an organization in Tanzania, we've done work in South Africa. So we're not going to have a presence there, but we're going to hopefully help other people be successful in this and provide them the resources and knowledge that we can share. Number one. And number two, if you get to Forbes and, you know, if you look at technology, really the biggest way that we believe we'll get the impact is simply through dissemination of knowledge, is through open source. Right? And so there's certain things that are very high touch, but we do it, but by the same token, what we really want is to ideally come up with a methodology that does have broad application, get it out to the world, and people will take it and use it for themselves. And a very big difference between, say, a nonprofit and a for-profit oftentimes is we hope to get our IP out there. Right? That's success for us. And we can develop it enough where it's valuable, and then where others can take it and apply it to their own situations. So just a couple of quick things, you know, along the lines of I think ties into social entrepreneurship. First and foremost, I couldn't agree more with what everybody's saying, and I think that you know, we often tend to think in these contexts of this or that, right? Business or nonprofit, or government or business. And I think we would all agree that doesn't work, that's not going to get us where we want to get to, that we have to be collaborating and working together. And so when I think about social entrepreneurship, to me it's not so important who's a social entrepreneur. I think it's about the core values of social entrepreneurship. And when I think about the core values of sustainability, of social impact, of appropriateness, responsiveness, all of those core values, if you think about that, that's not just for people in, say, the nonprofit sector like myself, but as Neville's talking about, that's what Coke's doing, right? That's what government's doing. So if we can simply agree about these core values, and these are all things that are critical for us to be successful, then we can come together and share best practices and figure out who should be doing what, where, and why, and when. Right? Obviously, one of the points of doing the type of work that we do is that we realize, again, not even through our own strategy, it's not going to create the greatest impact, but oftentimes we go and make and do things where businesses or governments won't yet or can't yet go. But then ideally we can open up and highlight those opportunities, and then the business sector can come in, and then the government can come in and make a contribution. And to move on to the conversation, I guess, so we can have the back and forth, but just sort of two other quick things is I think that within all of this, is if you think about, it continually comes up as thinking about capital. I think, you know, Susan knows this so well, is, you know, when you look at successful social entrepreneurial models and activities, I think the social entrepreneurs of the organizations understand that there's more than one form of capital. Right? When we talk about poverty so often, we're really just talking about economic capital. Right? People have less money. People don't have enough money. Right? But that's only one form of poverty, right? And that's really only a symptom. Yeah? So if you think about, when you think about the environments where we work, if you think about Haiti, yes, people are poor in that they don't have very much money. Yeah? But what about other forms of capital, social capital? Right? Obviously the microcredit and looking at solidarity groups, yeah? Social capital, knowledge capital, network capital, cultural capital, physical capital that's indigenous to the area. Yeah? People are very wealthy in so many other forms of capital. Right? And so we need to look at those other forms of capital and always be looking at where are the relative scarcities and where's the relative wealth. And by looking at it in that way, and then looking at ourselves and saying, where are we wealthy in forms of capital, maybe financial capital, but where are we poor? Maybe it's understanding of culture capital, their local knowledge, their social capital. And I think successful social entrepreneurs intuitively look at that whole capital mix and try to find where they can make a difference and where they can intervene to then optimize the forms of capital that are wealthy in the area and leverage those forms of capital. And so when organizations come together with local communities, it's how do we mitigate and build on each other's forms of capital. So I'll leave it there for right now, but I think, you know, as a final point, I live in New York City, and I went after Hurricane Sandy, myself and my wife, we went and volunteered in the Rockaways. And there were like 6 of us, or 10 of us that got on a bus, and we went out and went to the local fire station, and the local firemen are like, you know, who are these guys? What do they know how to do, right? And we just ended up going to 2 families' houses and cleaning out their basements. It was like 2 teams of 6 of us. And we did that for about 4 or 5 hours. And that was 2 houses. Yeah? And you look around all of those communities, you know, up and down on the East Coast and in the Rockaways. And you know, if you think about it, I think about social entrepreneurship, you know, it's really about just engaging, right? And so, you know, you can have big corporations and organizations, people doing this for a long time, but there's so many opportunities to make a difference, right? If somebody could just go and map the need, and ask people what they need and mobilize, because what it's going to take is a citizen sector. We can't wait for FEMA, we can't wait for the government, we can't wait for business, we can't wait around. And this isn't rocket science. We can find these solutions. It's simply like getting out there and engaging and finding, you know, what form of capital you can contribute to really create that change. So there's so much opportunity. I hope we take away from this conference ways in which we can all be contributing more. Thank you.